So hi, I'm pleased to say that I've been asked to make a little film about Ifor Hill Fort. Can you see it in the distance? Now, we don't know much about the Celts, although we know enough to be able to paint quite an exciting picture of the past. Now, I'm really interested in the Celts and in the hill forts of Gower. There are over 30. And if you imagine this hill fort here, say Ifor, would have had the most fantastic view over the estuary. And over in Lecca, there was a Roman fort, Leccarum. So we can imagine that the Celts over here, the Sauliwers, possibly also the Demetai, they would have been able to see the smoke tendrils coming from the Roman fort in the distance. So they would have had this perfect vantage point to see approach an enemy and to stay protected. Look at that view. Now, the Romans were actually rather scared of the knowledge and power of the Celts, and the Celts lived in a very organised way. So they lived in tribes and they had structure, so there were people in charge, tribe leaders, but most importantly perhaps were the Druids. Now, the Druids, they were able to speak to the Celtic gods, and they also knew what time of day and what time of year that special practices and rituals had to be performed, so that tribes could stay in the good favour of the gods and have good crops and good weather. Now, the Druids memorised everything, because the reason we don't know a great deal about the Celts is because they didn't write anything down. We sometimes call this period of history prehistory, before the written word. There are some written bits of information about the Celts. A lot of that's written by people called Tacitus and Caesar. You might have heard of Caesar, a great war general, Roman. Now, Caesar had a lot of respect for the Celts and the Druids, because he understood they had all of this knowledge and understanding of the natural world and of medicine, and also warfare, because the Druids would have been consulted about battles and wars, and they would have come up with strategies much in the same way, perhaps, although practiced very differently, to the Romans. They had their armies, and they of course invaded a lot of the known world. But the Celts also had strategies, and when the Romans attacked the Druids in the kind of final stand in the holy island of Anglesey, it was actually words that frightened the Druids initially. As they approached the coast of the island, the women were running around screaming, and they were chanting, and of course it was this fear of this kind of secret knowledge that was their power. Now, women actually could be quite powerful in Celtic society, and there was a famous warrior queen called Boudica. Now, she may have also been a Druid. And of course, the stories that we hear about have their deep, deep roots that may go back even as far as the Stone Age. And we know that the Druids were prolific because of our language and place names, and also archaeology. Now, there's a brilliant story that I really am fond of about a Roman soldier. Perhaps he came from Lecca. He fell in love with a local girl called Ellen, and he built a church to her in her memory called Llanelyn Church, around which the ancient and lost village of Llanelyn sprung up. And it's interesting because we talk about place names, and actually Llanelyn used to be near Llanryddion Holiday Park, and there's actually a caravan plot called Ellen's Spot or Ellen's Place. It's incredible to think that, isn't it? You see, the secret knowledge of the Druids, I actually think that the fairies in North Gower, they hold that secret knowledge. And when we get in touch with all of these fairy stories, they're a really tangible way of getting in touch with our deep and mysterious and ancient past. Now when I'm walking up to this hill fort, I like to think about the fact that the Romans called the tribes in South Wales, the Celtic tribes, the Silures. They would have been speaking a language that was very much like the Welsh that we speak today. So if you think about our language, it's amazing, because our language is based in a language similar to Welsh. So there really is important to learn Welsh if you think how ancient its roots are. Now I wanted to come back because look, I don't think we had a great look at those ditches before, and I wanted to try and think about what it would have been like to be a Celt. I mean, sometimes we think of history as being all kind of black and white and them wearing sort of drab clothes made in brown animal skins, but of course the Celts were very proud. And I actually spent the weekend with some archaeologists who were making razors, Bronze Age razors. So the Celts really took a lot of pride in their hair. They liked to trim their beards. They had long, sleek moustaches. They even used lime to colour their hair so that it looked very fair. So they also liked colour and colourful clothes. And when I think that a lot of them lived in round houses, not everyone lived inside the enclosure, of course. We don't know how many people might have lived in the surrounding area just outside. Perhaps the most important people lived inside and the less important outside. Although, to be honest, I'd be really happy with a plot of land with this view on Gower. A real prime location. So I'm going to take you just a bit further up the hill. Try not to huff and puff too much, just so that you can get a sense of the ditches. If we climb up a bit higher, of course the Celts themselves, they were also fantastic artists, and their art is definitely carried on being very important. I've got some beautiful Celtic jewellery, and they would have worn great torques, twisted gold around their necks, and fine armour. And it was, of course, it wasn't the Vikings who had horns on their helmets, but the Celts, who used to go into battle. And I don't know if I should tell you this, but sometimes they had no clothes on, and they used to come up over the hill. And there's one Celtic helmet, not from Wales but from Britain, that they found, and it had wings. Can you imagine that? Seeing this terrifying naked Celt coming storming over the hills with a winged helmet, shouting furiously as he went into battle, working himself up so he could try and take away some of the fear. Hello sheep, what do you think? And of course the thing is that when the Normans came and they tried to push out the Celts, they didn't actually succeed, but they did cause a lot of problems with taxes. And so some people became, they became sort of involved with the Normans, and they suffered what they had to. But a lot of people kind of ran into the hills and plotted, and there are distant stories of some pretty bloody battles between Celtic tribes as well, because if they had goods, then another tribe was struggling, they'd want to come and get some of their grain, so they'd try and hide it in these hill forts and use them as defensive points. If you look over there towards the Bulwark, somewhere that I've visited on another little video, there was an incredible battle there, the Battle of Tanky Lake, where the tribes are said, from Hardens down, are said to have sort of come down and met each other in the dip where Tanky Lake Moor is, had a terrible battle where there was so much blood it spilled out over the top of their boots. So I like to think there's always a bit of truth in stories, not that I like to think that there was a terrible bloody battle, but it does make the point that these stories endure, they carry on. And if you think that some stories, like Jack and the Beanstalk, are as old as the Bronze Age, so as old as those standing stones, thousands and thousands of years old, and of course in that period we call it prehistory because nothing is written down, and so everything is about memory. Imagine just passing stories down, and the Celts would have had special people to do this, the Druids, who would memorise hundreds and hundreds of stories, and those words, they were actually quite powerful. And actually when it was the final stand of the Druids at Anglesey in Wales, they were terrified by the words that the Druids shouted at them. The Romans were so frightened because the Celts knew so much, but they kept it secret and kept it to themselves, and the Romans were really afraid because they were such powerful people. And that knowledge of the plants and the medicine that we have at our fingertips, really, and all of the knowledge that they built up all over the years, and all of those words became more frightening than any written piece of law or anything that the Romans had in their highly sort of, you know, they had Latin, so they wrote things down. So it's worth thinking, isn't it, that some of the stories I'm going to tell you, some of the stories from North Gower, they have their roots in these Celtic stories. They're really, really old, and it's just amazing. So I'm back at my messy desk. I've got a lovely cup of tea. This is one of my favourite books, look. The Welsh fairy book. Look at this. It's actually worth quite a lot of money. Someone valued this for me recently at £400. Now I do love this book because I've got some Gower stories in here. But I love, look at these drawings. Aren't they beautiful? And look at this Welsh lady with a tall Welsh hat. Something really special about the Welsh fairies, don't you think? Oh, it's falling apart. Fairy borrowing, look. The fairies were in the habit of borrowing things. That reminds me of our story about Lagadantra Farm, borrowing a sieve to sifty gold. Now, I'm going to close this book before it falls apart and put it over here. And look at this. This is a beautiful presentation. Look at the Celtic art here. Now inside here, lots of old, see, even cost quite a lot of money secondhand. All these old Welsh and Irish poems, really old, date all the way back. The Song of the Woods, wonderful. Battle hymns, the High Tide. It's a very special book. But I really wanted to show you, look, it's a great example of a Celtic cross and Celtic art. I wanted to show you this. Now there's a man in Cardiff and he has put all of our hill forts on this map for me. Ifor top, there we are. The Bulwark, the second biggest. Little Iron Age settlement here on Bury Holme. Hardin's Down, there's two here. paddings down east and west. The nave, High Pennard, Bishopston Valley. Now that's an interesting one. I've got some pictures of some finds from here. And then Kilvey Hill. This is great, it shows us all the patterns of the hill forts, not all of them on here, and a key. So you've got promontory hill forts, coastal promontory forts, large coastal promontory forts, enclosures, open settlements. So interesting. And then here, look, you've got these spindle walls from High Pennard Hill Fort. And this is my favourite. This is called a bivalve mould, so there'd be two parts and it would be carved out of stone, and then bronze would be poured in to make decorative pieces, possibly rings, these bits here. The most interesting thing about it was found on Wyrm's Head, is that it looks like it came all the way from the continent, which shows that we were trading and people were travelling to Gower all that time ago, look. So it looks a bit like Greek waves. And a lot of things that were found on the Bulwark, so remember the second biggest Iron Age hill fort, their tools, finds from the Bulwark, Llanmaddock. And I've got this artefact, look. I want you to see if you can guess what this might have been. Sort of come all the way around here, and it would have had a handle through there. And this dates from the late Iron Age, the Romanized period when the Romans were here. So perhaps it was a weapon, perhaps it was a tool. It's pretty heavy. What do you think that was? I want you to have a think.